Well, Michele, thank you so much for joining us. You've met with various Stanford student groups here at Stanford and in Washington in the past, and we really appreciate you making time to join our students again today.
Well, great to be with you, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you. We've shared your bio, but I also read last month's Foreign Affairs interview, the How I Got Here piece that chronicled your inspiring career path. And I just have to ask up front, how did a young girl growing up in Southern California, attending Beverly Hills High School with aspirations of being an architect, what inspired you to serve in government initially, and how did you end up serving at the highest levels in our Department of Defense?
Well, I must confess that I did get the bug for all things international, being an exchange student over in Belgium for a summer, and was very interested in things international, but also loved architecture and engineering. I took every engineering course that my high school offered and competed in the state fair and all that good stuff. But I had a wonderful guidance counselor who said, Michele, you can always be an architect. You don't have to go right there. So get a liberal arts education, take design as you go, and then you'll have to, if you want to go pursue that in graduate school, great. Well, by the time I was by my sophomore year of college, I had discovered the world of international relations and really got that bug, and so ended up pursuing that. And then the story of how I got into government, I spent a number of years in think tanks, and really it was the bosses and mentors that I was able to work with, who, when they went into government in the Clinton administration, said, hey, come on, we need some help. And at that point, I had a couple of different offers at state and DOD, and got the great advice of choose the boss, not the job. So I chose to work for Ted Warner, who was a legendary mentor and developer of young people. And off I went. That was my first government experience.
Wonderful. Well, I'll start at the strategic level with some questions. So back in the 90s, when you were at the Belfer Center, Cold War just ended. There was great hope that as China's economy grew, it was going to become more integrated in the world-based order and responsible stakeholder. I was at the Kennedy School just a couple years later, and I remember Dean Jonai then warning that if you treat China like an enemy, it will become one. But here we are in 2020, not quite what we'd hoped for, despite our best efforts. Certainly the current, or the most recent national security strategy, national defense strategy, acknowledge that we are in an era of great power competition. So the question is great power competition, is that an accurate characterization of our relationship with China?
Yes and no. It's yes in that it does capture a key element of the relationship going forward, but it's not a full explanation. And so let me explain. I do think that throughout the 1990s, we were really focused on this project of trying to integrate China into the global system so that it would become a responsible stakeholder. That was Bob Zoellick's term. And we did everything we can, WTO membership, all kinds of cooperative efforts. And I think that worked for a while, but at a certain point, particularly under President Xi, China decided that it was, the hide and bide strategy was over. It was time to kind of claim their rightful place in the international community, be more assertive in pursuing their agenda in international fora, and particularly in the Asia Pacific. And it became clear then that we have a number of areas where we really don't see eye to eye, and our interests and objectives are in conflict. And so I do think when you look, whether it's economic, technological, military, there are very important competitions that we're going to have with China over the coming years that will determine, the U.S. ability to protect its own economic vitality, but also our security and that of our allies. That said, there are also problems when you look around the world, whether it's the next pandemic or climate change or nonproliferation, where if the United States and China don't figure out how to cooperate with one another, we will both be, in deep trouble. So there has to be a cooperative element of the relationship as well. And so that's why I don't like the Cold War frame. I don't like the necessarily an enemy, inevitable war frame. I think the name of the game is managing this competition, fostering cooperation where we can, but really focusing on deterring conflict between two nuclear powers, which by definition would be a disaster.
Well, on this topic, we assigned your recent foreign affairs piece, How to Prevent a War in Asia. And in that, you warned that the more confident China's leaders are in their own capabilities, and the more they doubt the capabilities and resolve of the U.S., the greater the chance of miscalculation and a breakdown in turns that could bring direct conflict between two nuclear powers. Michele, do you believe that China is becoming increasingly more confident in their own capabilities and increasingly more in doubt of our own? And if so, why?
So they definitely are becoming more confident in their own capabilities. They've invested a lot in an anti-access area denial strategy, and you see thousands and thousands of different kinds of precision munitions and rockets and missiles. And so they are really doing a pretty good job of trying to create a situation where it will be very costly for us to go inside the first island chain or even the second island chain. But they're not 10 feet tall, right? They have a lot of challenges as a military as well. But the thing that worries me most is the narrative that's taking hold in Beijing about the United States, which particularly in the wake of our mishandling of the pandemic, the onset of another recession, the sort of divisions and protests you see on the streets, it's given rise to a narrative of US decline, US self-preoccupation, US turning inward. And to the extent that Chinese leaders really start to believe that and really believe that we have not done what is necessary to counter their A2AD system, they could gain a sense of false confidence that might get them to take more risk-taking behavior, to push the envelope a little too far, a little too fast, maybe cross some red lines that they don't even know they're crossing. So it's on us to be very clear, the United States, about our resolve, our commitment to defending our interests and allies, what and how we define those, and really clear investments in the capabilities that will ensure our ability to project power and protect those interests in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to bring out another quote from a great piece you wrote recently that we assigned our class, and really kind of a tough warning. And you warn us that it's not about spending more, but it's about spending smarter. And the Defense Department cannot continue to buy more of the same while expecting new results. It must invest in significantly new capabilities and concepts to reimagine how it fights. And this is a focus of our class. We're really trying to get the students to reimagine how we might fight. Could you maybe elaborate more on how we might spend smarter, and what can we do to better develop the new operational concepts we need to address security threats and reimagine how we fight future conflict?
I think the real long pole in the tent is in developing new operational concepts in light of a clear-eyed assessment of what we're going to face from either China or, for example, Russia's A2AD network in Europe. You really, and it forces us into an uncomfortable position. We like to be dominant in every domain. We like to be the one to beat. Here, in every case, we're going to have to be the asymmetric challenger. You've got a resident power with a huge set network of capabilities. They're going to have more quantity than us by definition. We're going to have to figure out how to fight it asymmetrically for advantage. And so that means first and foremost that we really do have to think about new concepts. We have to have much more competitive processes for developing those concepts, not sort of building consensus on lower common denominator concepts where everybody gets an equal share of the pie. Not interesting, not interested in that. We have to link that to a lot of prototyping of new capabilities, experimenting with those new capabilities, see how they can inform the new concepts and vice versa. And so this very agile iterative process of bringing new technologies in, prototyping systems, playing them in war games, playing them in simulations, playing them in different experiments, taking that feedback, those learnings, bringing it back to inform the next iteration of the design and so forth. This is the process that's going to get us to the right place. And it's something that's just really, really hard for the Department of Defense to do. We're not set up to do that quickly or well or at scale.
Thanks. On this topic, you've also identified that this conceptual shift towards great power competition, that it really hasn't been matched by the required realignment of concepts, culture, and service programs and budgets. What are some of the highlights of these needed realignments in your opinion?
Well, first, the sense of urgency that you do hear at the top among the Pentagon leadership is not necessarily fully shared throughout the bureaucracy. Surprise, surprise. we haven't adjusted, we've started to adjust our acquisition approach. Some departments put out some very useful new guidance on how to approach software acquisition in a very different way than hardware acquisition. But we haven't necessarily trained our acquisition people, incented them to have a greater risk tolerance that's required for this agile development of emerging technologies, nor have we created real rewards, promotion paths, career paths for that. And so there's a huge human capital effort to be done here to raise the overall tech literacy of all of the folks, from the program managers to the operators, but also to bring more tech talent into government to really help speed the transformation process. And that requires, again, some culture change. You're not going to keep tech talent if they walk into a typical Pentagon office today. You gotta create a different operating culture. And I do think there's some great examples where, Kessel Run in the Air Force, or the Joint AI Center in OSD. These are places that are pockets of where, and parts of SOCOM, these are pockets where they're trying a different approach, different culture, and having some success attracting the kind of tech talent the department needs. We just need to do all of that at much greater scale and with greater urgency.
Well, thank you. Unrelated topic, you've also written that, in your opinion, the DoD doesn't have an innovation problem, but rather has an innovation adoption problem. Mm. And you mentioned some of the organizations trying to help with that. We have our own, Defense Innovation Unit is just down the street with Mike Brown at the helm. But how can DoD better address its, as you characterize, this innovation adoption problem?
I think we've gotten much better, thanks to organizations like DIU, at tech scouting, finding promising technologies that might have a military application, getting them on that initial contract of a SBIRS contract or an OTA prototyping contract. But the real problem is almost everybody hits the famous valley of death. So you've done the great prototype, you've won the demonstration, everybody loves you. And then they say, well, the next time we can actually insert you into the program and for a production contract is 2023, or, like 2 years from now, 2.5 years from now. And, for a startup, that's like, what do you mean? I mean, I gotta have some access to recurring revenue here to survive until then. And so they get pressure from their investors to forget the national security side, just go commercial. It's this terrible situation. So what do we need for that? Number one, you need a more flexible set of funding authorities to bridge that gap. One idea is to allow the services to have some greater reprogramming authorities within mission areas or across portfolios, so that at the end of a year, when they have something that didn't work, they can scrape up money there and put it into the thing that the next iteration of development for the thing that does work, and maybe get another year of bridge funding to get to that production contract. That obviously requires some working with Congress to get them comfortable that they'll have the transparency and oversight they need to give the department that kind of flexibility. But I also think it involves bringing the ultimate end user into the earliest contact. So you have a program manager who's like watching this thing like a hawk from the beginning and is already thinking about how it's going to disrupt and be integrated into something he or she is responsible for. And you have to incent that rather than, again, just rewarding this rigorous, we only care about cost and schedule of what is. You've got to incent program managers to say, if you can get better performance at lower cost, you got to be a disruptor yourself. You've got to bring new ideas into this, what you're managing, to do that, which is a very different approach. Not easy to do, but we have to try to figure that out.
Thank you. I again read into that Foreign Affairs Careers interview that you had, and you talked about your experience at West Exec, and I quote you that you said, most fun and exciting we help. Or one of the most fun and exciting things we do is help small technology companies navigate the national security space, and that you're trying to help bridge the gap between the national security world and America's best tech talent. And you warn that this is something that we as a nation need to figure out urgently if we don't want to be overtaken by others. You talked a bit about this. Could you elaborate more on how we can best bridge this gap most effectively, and maybe some advice you have for a startup founder, perhaps a Stanford grad who wants to work with the DoD or other government agencies?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing I would say is you probably need a coach. I mean, we don't lobby or do any business development for anybody, but we're really good at helping a new tech startup company that's entering the defense space to understand what are the possible use cases for what they've got, who are the potential customers, but not only the customers, but who are all the folks that will have a yes or no vote on your way to getting to that customer. So we do kind of a stakeholder mapping exercise, and then help them really develop almost like a campaign plan of a prioritized set of, here's where to go first, here's how to navigate, here are the kinds of things you should be doing to raise your profile and so forth. So it's really kind of a coaching effort. And we do it at a couple of different levels. For more established companies, we'll do it on a retainer basis and just be with them along the journey. For smaller companies that don't have money for a retainer, we've also developed West Exec Ventures and a group called Ridgeline, which has a Silicon Valley presence. And there we'll take an equity position in exchange for that coaching and that helping navigate to first contracts and so forth. So it's really exciting in that I feel like we are helping to matchmake between some of the most cutting edge tech that's out there and the DoD and IC customers that desperately need it. And hopefully taking a bit of time out of that process and doing a small part to accelerate those matches.
One more for me, and I'll switch to some student questions. But again, our current national defense strategy, which we've had our students read, the line of effort too is strengthen alliances and building new partnerships. Certainly this is, I had some time in DoD working in the Indo-Pacific region. This is what Secretary Mattis's mantra was, go out there and strengthen those alliances and let's work with partners. But in the technology side, what opportunities do you see to work more closely with allies and partners, in defense tech and innovation? And there's been some work on calling for an allied innovation base, for example, but where can we work more closely with allies and partners in defense technology innovation?
Well, I do think for each of the key, priority areas, whether it's, AI or robotics or quantum or hypersonics, whatever it is, we could do some mapping of which of our allies really has cutting edge work going on, either in their research universities or in their innovation base, and to look for opportunities of where can we perhaps get farther faster by sharing some of that. And there are all kinds of ways to do this. One is to cross-invest. I know In-Q-Tel has started investing in UK companies, Australian companies, for example, with certain priorities in mind. I would love to see, DIU get into the business of starting to bring some of those allied companies in. But I think this needs to be also a topic of policy discussion of where can we collectively maybe go after some of these areas with joint ventures or joint technology development and more, efforts like that at scale. But I think it's a very important area, particularly given that both China and Russia are going to be leveraging these technologies in ways that are really counter to our Western values in terms of surveillance systems and without respect for personal privacy and all kinds of things. And I think the more we have a common values-based approach to technology with our allies, the stronger we can be in showing up at international fora where standards are being set or norms are being set and so forth.
Well, thank you. On the topic of values, Katie, we have an undergraduate senior majoring in international relations, asked this question, and she asked, as modern technology moves towards more autonomy, strategy and rapid decision-making may necessitate less human involvement. How can we preserve American values in the deployment of cutting-edge and emerging technologies, even with this shift? And how can the US compete against competitors that may not integrate the same ethical constraints, such as human privacy, in their technological development and deployment?
Yeah, I think it's really important to try to define guiding principles in each of these areas. And I actually think one of the better examples is the Defense Innovation Board put out some AI principles that have then been adopted by the Department of Defense. And when you have those principles in mind, they certainly need to be fleshed out, but you can actually take some of those and work them into almost being design criteria for certain types of systems. And then you can augment them with fleshing out, actually, what are the principles that are going to be governing use of these technologies? And how do you ensure that there is human decision making and human accountability for whatever, whether semi-autonomous or autonomous systems, whatever they do on the battlefield. So I think this is a really rich area. I think it's a strength for the United States military to stay true to those values and that accountability. There's a lot of challenge in terms of operationalizing that, in terms of, working it into testing and evaluation systems, working it into specific use cases. But I think ultimately that is an advantage for us, even though it may constrain us or slow us down occasionally vis-a-vis our competitors who may be willing to do things that are unethical or not fully tested or not fully kind of in line with international norms. But down the road, we want to be able to hold them accountable for that. So I think building some norms for ourselves, but also some international consensus around those norms is very important to be able to constrain bad behavior or inappropriate use of these technologies in the future.
Thank you. So moving on, we actually have our National Security Affairs Fellows who are serving military officers that attending Stanford. And this question comes from Raj, an Army colonel and Security Affairs Fellow. And he asks, what legacy programs should be downsized to fund investment in emerging technologies?
It's a great and necessary question because, DoD always has more program than budget. But I think with COVID, with the recession, whoever wins the White House in November, you're going to see a flattening of the DoD budget. The sort of assumptions of 3 to 5% growth over and above inflation, that's not going to hold no matter who's in the White House. So you're going to have to make some tough trade-offs. I can't give you an answer off the top of my head, but I can tell you how I would think it through. I think we need to look mission area by mission area and look at across services at portfolios of capabilities to ask the question, what is the mix that we need so that we have the platforms we need, but also the money to invest and incorporate the emerging technologies that will make those legacy platforms survivable, relevant, combat effective in the future. And so it really has to happen on a mission area basis. I think in some cases, you may find redundant capabilities within or between services. Sometimes you'll say, I don't want that redundancy. I'm going to make a roles and missions kind of determination, and one is going to be a winner and the other is going to be a loser. But sometimes for the sake of resilience, for the sake of complicating adversary attack planning, you may want redundancy. You may want multiple different ways to accomplish a particular task. So this has to be done, I think, with very strong analytic grounding, looking at both performance and capability, but also, cost and so forth. My own bias is that we have to be much more aggressive in going down the road of human machine teaming and in gaining mass, gaining capacity, and complicating, the other side's planning process by incorporating unmanned in all domains, more unmanned, undersea, on the sea, in the air, and beyond. So that is going to give us, for the cost of the system, a lot more capacity and capability if we can crack the code on that integration.
Thank you, Michele. So we're here in the heart of Silicon Valley, and there was a time decades ago when our best engineers and computer scientists went off they worked for the government, worked for government labs. That's where the best problems were. That's where it was really exciting. But boy, now our students, they head down the street to Google, Facebook. It's really hard to convince them that there may be some opportunities in the government. So Andrew, actually a business major, asked this question. He asked, what should be done to enhance the recruitment and retention of a technologically superior defense workforce?
Well, I think the first thing is there have to be some bridges built. And we're actually doing a very interesting project with Schmidt Futures to try to really open up a pipeline of experienced tech talent to come into the parts of DoD that are actually cracking the code on how to really leverage tech talent and give them, the platform and the tools they need to be successful. So whether it's, the Jake or parts of the Air Force or the Army's building a new software factory, trying to help source talent. But then I think we're finding one of the most important things we're doing, who knew, is creating a handbook for the DoD folks to say, here are all the authorities you may not know you have for bringing tech talent in. Here are the best practices in terms of the hiring, how you'd approach the hiring process. Here are the kinds of things you need to have in place to make those folks successful and give them the tools they need to really contribute. So trying to take all the learnings of where it's been tried and failed or where it's succeeded and why, and put it in a handbook for the DoD hiring authorities to say, here's your own learnings that you can build on to get that tech talent in at greater scale and with greater speed. One of the key barriers, though, is still the clearance process. So that tends to hold people up for a bit. But I think the department is seriously working on trying to reduce some of those barriers. Then the second piece I would say is career paths. The services are actually sitting on a lot of STEM talent, but they don't manage them as STEM talent. They force the young captain who's the Air Force AI specialist to leave and go out and be, on a squadron staff in order to check the box so he can get his next promotion. The services need to design career paths for technologists so that they can get rewarded, promoted, and reach leadership positions as technologists. Otherwise, we will under leverage the people who are already in the force.
No, thank you. So Michele, we teach a number of defense technology, defense innovation classes at Stanford. Technology and national security, which our own Bill Perry taught for many years. A new class, technology, innovation in modern war, and hacking for defense. With all these classes, we ask the students to really kind of identify problems and challenges that they would want to solve, whether it's in our new operational concepts or tech-informed solution to a defense challenge. But if I could ask you this question, is kind of a collective one from the students who are now looking for their final project problems, if you will. But what are some potential DoD problems or operational concepts that you would like to see our best and brightest here at Stanford address in class now and in the future, and why?
So I think the long pole in the tent is this notion of joint all-domain command and control in an environment that will be constantly contested. So the analogy is, how do you build the equivalent of a resilient electrical grid as your command and control network, so that if a part of it, you have electronic warfare attack on one end, it goes down, the system automatically reroutes and is connecting shooters and sensors in a different way that allows them to keep operating without missing a beat. You have a cyber attack on another part of the system and it reroutes and so forth. So it's really coming up with how the key elements of stitching together a network of networks that has that resilience and ability to compute and operate at the edge, even during periods where there's disruption and you can't sort of call back to headquarters. So that to me is the long pole in the tent for future multi-domain operations, this very distributed approach to warfare that will be necessary. The second piece is the technical aspects of human-machine teaming. And how that really works. And again, in multiple domains, whether it's undersea or on the sea or in the air or above. That is another key point. And then just lots of applications that can increase the accuracy and speed of our decision-making faster than that of the other side. Humans still making the decisions, but just getting the right information, the right analysis to them at the right moment in time where we can make the decision and gain the advantage in the cycle of competition.
Thanks. Thank you. This question is from Myrtle, a graduate student here, and he looked at a poll and said that half of Americans describe current U.S. defense spending as about right. But given the unpopularity of increasing defense budgets and that the future administration may even reduce defense spending, how can the DoD most effectively allocate or reallocate resources to maintain a competitive edge? Big question, but maybe you could pick a couple
have to do
opportunities.
a very rigorous analysis of the capability mix that's needed for a very different future than the one we've been optimizing for over the last 20 years. We're moving from a focus on counterterrorism and counterinsurgency to deterring great power conflict, and that's a very different set of requirements. But I also think there's a lot of money that goes into the enterprise of DoD. The fastest growing cost in the department is personnel costs. The second fastest growing is operations and maintenance costs. So there's like applying AI to things like predictive maintenance. A lot of the early pilots have very promising results in terms of bringing down costs and increasing mission capable rates. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done on the enterprise side to try to reduce costs or to enable some shifting of money over to reinvest in the pointy end of the spear. Again, easier said than done. But part of the challenge is having the change management and tech talent necessary to really enable that kind of reform in the department. And that's not always been present, but needs to be if we're going to take that on at scale.
Thank you. So this question comes from Junior, a Foster, who's a computer science major. And his question is, responding to these threats, the threats we've been discussing, requires a unified American commitment. How can the Defense Department and our leadership unify the U.S. against these threats in a highly partisan and divided political environment?
It's a great question, and it points to this question of leadership. We need a president and a commander-in-chief to step forward and provide a vision, to make the case for why, how, to provide the sort of nature of the challenges, the threat assessment, why it's important to the prosperity and security of Americans at home, and what we need to do to go after it. I would love to see, a moonshot moment kind of speech, a Kennedy speech that sort of says, we're in this competition, and this is really going to matter to our way of life. But we're America. We know how to do this. We came out of the Great Depression. We came out of World War II. We came out of Vietnam, and we have done this before. That we are in crisis. We're going to come out of this, and we're going to be stronger. And all of us need to help. So how are you going to help? Invest in the drivers of American competitiveness. And some of it will be by doing great work in STEM in our research universities. Some of it will be investing in 21st century infrastructure. Some of it will be developing these new technologies that can transform both our society and our economy and our military, but really inspiring Americans to say, we need your talents. We need everybody to step up and help. That's what I'm looking for. And I haven't seen it recently, but I'm looking for that kind of leadership.
Well, I think all of America appreciates good leadership. Michele, we're getting to the end of our time, and I want to ask kind of a broad question as moderator. But many in the U.S., they're concerned about this growing civil-military gap. And as service becomes more insular and really a family business. I know your father was a World War II veteran. Your husband was career Navy, and son is serving now. My son's at West Point. He'll be a fifth-generation Army officer if he makes it through. But in all our classes, our students, they care about national security, but they're not necessarily interested in, military service. So the question is, what advice would you give America's best and brightest, at Stanford and other universities across the country on how they can serve and make a difference, short of joining the military or even other U.S. government organizations?
Yeah, I think that we should all feel some, hopefully desire, but and also an obligation to serve. To be partaking of all the incredible freedoms and benefits of this country. What can we give back? And for some of us, it's going to be going into government service or serving in the military. But there are ways to serve, you know, in other parts of the US government. There are ways to serve in nonprofits. I mean, one of my main activities is I'm on the board of CARE, which does international humanitarian and development work. I'm on the board of The Mission Continues, which helps veterans continue their mission of service in their home communities when they decommission. You know, there are all kinds of ways to get involved in enriching the society and helping to serve the United States. And so find whatever that area of passion is for you, find the time to do that. Maybe it's going to be through your work, but maybe it's going to be through some of the activities you do when you're not at work. But I would just say, you know, if we all stepped up to that, you know, sort of drive to serve, doesn't have to be in government. I think, you know, we just enrich our society so greatly. So the assignment, the homework assignment is find that passion and that path to service, whether it's going into government for a stint, advising or helping, or investing in some other way that's going to, you know, make your community or the country or the world, you know, a better place.
Michele, that's a great note to end on. I don't know how we could top that great advice. So really on behalf of our students, you know, thank you for all you've done and all your really important roles. You've been a real inspiration for us, and we certainly wish you the best in whatever comes next. And you're always welcome back at Stanford. Hopefully we'll be able to invite you to come back in person someday when we when things open up. But thank you again for joining us, and thank you for all the great advice and insights you provide our students today.
Thanks for the great questions, and look forward to seeing you in person maybe next year. So,
thank you, Michele.
bye-bye.